is sometimes a very vague line as to what you're doing. So there has been company that is trying to move some of the, I would say, development and operation outside of China for sure. Now the question is, should they move to Hong Kong? Because a lot of them actually has a base in Hong Kong. And I have to say that there is a mixture of position at this point in time. Some company, such as FTX, as you probably have known, was original domiciled in Hong Kong and one of the top exchange, decided to move outside of Hong Kong completely. Some of them has decided to continue to have some presence in here, and some of them has decided to diversify and move some of the resources down to Southeast Asia. So whether or not the government has make indication that they want to follow the suit of what Chinese government is doing, their so far I would say inaction has prompted a lot of companies that make their own move in order to protect the business. In fact, we are going to have a meeting with some of the related government parties probably in 2 weeks, and that's one of the issues that we want to voice out with the government as to whether they want to make a stand on that position on there, or they want to just leave it vague at this point in time. And I think our stand is that if the government doesn't want to make a statement on this, then people will assume the worst scenario.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for sharing this great insights. And besides this one, I think we all know that like recent stack has just in China witnessed a really great digital currency evolution. So I have another question for our two guest speakers. So from your perspective, like what impact would the digital currency evolution in China brings to the Chinese yuan in the international financial system? And how will this just like maybe further affect the dominance of the US dollars? So let's may first invite the Professor Delphine to share his opinions on this question.
That's an excellent question, Natalie, and it's captured a lot of attention in the United States, particularly in Congress, where Congress representatives are very concerned that if China gets a head start with ECNY, then the dominance of the dollar will be reduced. So first, one must be clear that it's unlikely, in my view, that China or most large countries will allow their central bank digital currencies to circulate inside the monetary system of other countries. However, which in itself suggests that it's not a question of ECNY becoming dominant internationally. That's not going to happen. But there are advantages for China in terms of leadership and setting standards for central bank digital currencies. China has gotten a lot of prestige and attention for being the first large country to issue a CBDC. And China is also helping set standards for cross-border payments, where a CBDC from one country would be exchanged for a CBDC from another country. And by getting a head start on cross-border payments and on setting international standards for CBDCs, China can provide leadership in a way that advantages it in international discussions. And moreover, at some point, if the United States does not issue central bank digital currency or contribute to the infrastructure for cross-border payments in some other way, then the dominance of the dollar will perhaps be diminished a bit. Right now, the dollar is by far the most dominant payment currency in the world. It's also used for international financial transactions other than payments, for international trade and trade invoicing. And so and many investors around the world rely on the dollar. But that's not a guarantee that it will last forever. China's economy is growing, and at some point will surpass the size of the US economy. And if China were to eliminate or largely eliminate its capital controls that prevent the flow of renminbi back and forth across its borders, then China's currency will be perhaps rivaling the US dollar. But I don't think that fact will arise simply because of the CBDC. It will happen in any case if China continues to grow and liberalizes its financial system, opening up its capital markets and allowing cross-border capital flows. So I hope that answers the question somewhat, but please ask me again if you like.
Definitely. This like we learn a lot from your sharing on this problem. And so maybe like what about like Professor Pon? Like maybe in your view, like what influence like has the digital currency revolution in China bring to the international financial system?
Okay. I'm pretty much aligned with Professor Duffy. So a couple of things to add to that. So first thing is there are already Asian trade that is happening that is denominated in renminbi. So that's not something new. It has been going on for the last 10 years already. And then I think China has been exerting its influence despite the currency control of using renminbi as part of their trading denominations rather than using US dollars. Which from a China perspective, it makes a lot of sense because if you look at the regional trade perspective, it's really tightly integrated. Whether there is a perception a lot of things are shipping to Southeast Asia or shipping back, China is still a largest consumption economy within Asia in here, and it also has a largest manufacturing hub over in here. So with respect to that, then I think that currency will grow regardless. The second part, I would second what Professor Duffy is saying, is that if the CBDC of China is not going to change the position of the reserve currency by itself. If it is changed, it has to do with the fact that China has become the largest economy around the world. If it has to change, it has to do with the improvement in confidence of the currency itself, including the currency control. And to some extent, I would say if it were to change, if you look at the World War II, where the currency was switching from the pound, UK pound, to US dollar, has to do with the confidence shift of the whole world, where people no longer believe in the previous reserve currency, and they would like to move to the new reserve currency of US dollar today. So if it were to happen, it might have more to do with the fact that the United States currency, relatively speaking, in terms of confidence level around the world, has been shifted to renminbi or other currency, rather than the fact that China is coming to dominate. I think the point is, if China, whether or not come in to replace or not to replace, it's simply providing an option for the world to choose. And if US confidence, the US reserve currency to the world confidence is shaken, that's where the opportunity lies for the shift. Okay.
Could I follow up? I'd like to get Professor Puen's thinking on a related issue. Is that okay, Natalie?
Sure, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So as I said, I don't think large countries like China and the US would let CBDCs circulate inside the payment systems of other countries. Already, the People's Bank of China has said that it will not do that. Wu Changchun, for example, and Zhou Xiaochuan have both said that. However, there is the possibility that international payments in renminbi could be facilitated by stablecoins like the proposed CNHC, which would be denominated in Hong Kong renminbi deposits. It is being formulated in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. And in principle, it could be a very useful innovation for business-to-business payments across international borders and would not violate the norm that I mentioned of CBDCs circulating outside of China or outside of the central bank area. Does Professor Puen, do you think that a stablecoin like CNHC could become quite useful and extend the reach of the renminbi and its usefulness? And do you think in response to that, other large currency zone like United States should also allow or encourage stablecoins denominated in dollars or euros to circulate internationally so that they can compete for currency dominance?
Okay, so let me kind of, well, first of all, I'm sure you're aware that there is currently a cross-border activities or experiment going on in Hong Kong MA, which is the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, whereby they have been doing an experiment between Hong Kong dollar and Thai. And recently, I think UAE and PBOC has been participating in that specific discussion. So I want to make a disclaimer that I'm not involved in that project. Of course, there are some document published on that, but you can pretty much guess what is going on in there. Now, I think what they are trying to do right now is more a technological feasibility study, not that much on how exactly the market is going to work. Okay. So one of the doubts that I have, and this only represents my own personal opinion, not any position from the government or anything like that, is that when you try to, so before I get into that, let's just try to understand how it works today, right? So if I were to take Hong Kong dollar and trying to move it into Thai baht, right? Most of the time, what people will do is first exchange Hong Kong dollar to US dollar, and then do the US dollar transfer, and then from the US dollar back to Thai baht, right? So this has been the way it is because Hong Kong dollar to US dollar is a much liquid market, and so is the Thai baht to US dollar. There is not a very liquid market between Hong Kong dollar and Thai baht, frankly speaking, right? So the issue that I'm seeing the whole discussions that all these technical studies that have been doing is they kind of neglect the market aspect of it as to what is happening. And to a large extent, my comment to them last time I talked to them is who is going to be the market maker? And that is most relevant. So to the point of what Professor Duffy was saying is, it's not that much of whether the currency, how you actually transact, what type of blockchain or non-blockchain system that you're going to build. And there is a paper by BIS that talk about different type of blockchain implementation architecture. It's really the market making is who is going to enable that currency exchange with or without US dollar. And that to me is the main thing that I don't think a lot of people talk about, okay? And like it or not, the whole financial system today is filled with the reliance that everyone will fall back to the global reserve currency, which is US dollar, as the denomination as to how you actually trade, okay? So with that, I don't know whether I answer your questions, but I think setting up a zone simply helps you to draw the borderline of removing the currency control. The technical difficulty part is solvable. I'm sure that there is enough genius in there that they will eventually solve it. The thing that I'm actually most worried about is really the liquidity providers. Who is going to actually help you to make that exchange? And if you were to do that, is that exchange favorable compared to moving back to US dollar and then in and out?
Yeah, definitely. Really appreciate your insights sharing during this conversation. So maybe we have another question, also follow up on this discussion for the Professor Duffy. Like we have noticed that you have made a conclusion on a CNBC report that the US should not rest on its current leadership in the field of the digital currency. And we're really interested to know more about what makes you to draw this conclusion. And also from your point of view, what action should the US take to catch up with China and other countries which are developing their digital currency recently?
That's the most important question, the most important policy issue, Natalie, that's facing the US government. Actually, I testified in the Senate Banking Economic Subcommittee this summer on that exact question. So, well, the United States has a difficult policy decision about how to improve its own payment system. And it's an important question, even if China were not to introduce a central bank digital currency, because the United States payment system is very expensive for merchants to use. It's very slow and it's not very efficient. For example, when you walk into a coffee shop to buy your coffee in the United States, it seems simple and cheap. You just tap your card or your phone and you get your coffee and you walk out. You don't think about the fact that the coffee shop really has to pay an extra 2 to 2.5% of the money to the credit card company and the banks, and it won't get the money for at least a day or perhaps 2 or 3 days. So it's not that cost of that to the merchant is being effectively charged back to the consumer, and it creates inefficiencies in the payment system. The banking system is closed overnight, so there are no direct payments during the evening, although the United States is trying to do something about that. And there's very weak competition because it's difficult for fintech firms to enter competition with banks. And because of all of that, there's a lot of work for the United States to do, even without the international issues that are spurring concern in Washington over China's central bank digital currency. So whether the US introduces a CBDC will not really be in reaction to China's ECNY. It's more, should the United States do this to improve its own payment system and to contribute to efficiency in cross-border payments? In my view, it's too early to make that decision, but it's not too early to invest in the development of the technology. So my suggestion to the senators in the United States Congress is that they immediately begin a development project, because as China has shown, it takes 5 to 10 years to get a CBDC design that's acceptable, that makes good trade-offs between privacy and the ability to detect illegal payments, and makes it cheap, efficient, interoperable, and reach the consumers that don't currently have bank accounts. That is a very difficult design problem that has not yet been solved. China is doing it in a different way. And China can force merchants in China to accept CBDC. But in the United States, there's no ability to force something like that, or at least it's not simple. And there are many simpler ways, I think, to improve the payment system before the last resort, which is the CBDC. Regulation for competition would be more effective. However, it may not be forthcoming. It may be that the government will choose not to force competition into the payment system and get innovation through competition. And in that case, it would be very useful to have already developed the technology to release the CBDC, because while it's the last resort, it will be better than what is currently the case, most likely.
Yeah, definitely. And again, also, yeah, definitely.
Natalie, can I have a follow-up question?
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to,
because we are actually doing some study on this one. Professor Duffy, I actually would like to kind of hear your view, right? Because one of the things that we are in the process of studying is, as I have disclosed, in China, the WeChat Pay and Alipay is charging 0.6%. And with the introduction of CBDC, essentially you're looking forward to a kind of 0% type of regime, whether the cost is being absorbed by the government or whoever it is. But let's not worry about that for now. But I think if you were to push that out, the fundamental principle is, if I'm a merchant, and if the interface is the same, meaning using a mobile phone, of course, I would choose the payment method that has the lowest fee, right? That is no doubt about it, simple economic principle. No matter whether it's China or United States, it's going to apply. Now, in US, I have actually lived in there for close to 16 years, and I kind of know how the system works over there. I think the forces to push down the fee at the expense of a lot of finance company, the banks, the credit card company, the payment company, and all these things, is going to have a huge resistance. How is that going to help? I mean, how is it going to manifest that the ability to push this down that will introduce such a huge disruption to the existing market and especially the profitability? I mean, I just don't see how that is going to come in. Now, of course, there's this wonderful thing called buy now, pay later now, which there is supposed to be hidden, less hidden costs and lower interest that is flourishing over in the United States. I just don't see how that will materialize. Maybe you can kind of give us some light on that, other than competition, which is really general. How exactly is it going to really happen?
Well, that's the most interesting question on the economic side, is even if the United States were to introduce a CBDC, how do you get consumers to demand to use it? Because if you use your credit card, you get miles on airlines, or you get cash rewards, or you get points that you can spend on Amazon or whatever. And if you use your CBDC app, it costs the same to the consumer. They don't pay any of these interchange fees that you mentioned. And even though the merchant would prefer that you pay with your CBDC app because that means no interchange fee, the consumer will still take out of their purse or wallet their credit card in order to get these rewards. This is what the economists Rocher and Tirole called a two-sided market, in which you give one side a big advantage, the consumers, so that the other side doesn't have any choice. They must accept it. The only way to address this, in my view, is regulation. In Europe, in fact, the interchange fee for using a credit card was slashed by regulation to about 1/8, 1/8 of the US interchange fee,
Wow.
which means that Europe has much cheaper merchant costs for credit card use. And I think the US authorities should do that. And the more that they can reduce the interchange fees, the less the incentive that the consumers will have to demand to use their credit card rather than a CBDC app or some other payment method that's much more efficient. But as long as the interchange fees are allowed to be very high, then the credit card companies and banks will always provide wonderful incentives to the consumers to use their credit cards, and the consumers will say, I'm not going to use the CBDC app or a stablecoin or a fintech payment service like Alipay, because I get $1 of cash back every time I use my credit card per $100, or I get another mile of airline miles that I can fly over to London or bring my daughter home from London. So I think it's a difficult thing to crack without regulation.
So the move that Amazon recently took to essentially they reject any credit card that is issued in UK because of the fee, it's probably pretty bold from the merchant side, right?
Very bold.
I just won't take it, and I don't want anything to do with that at the expenses of reducing potentially the GMV.
Yeah, Amazon can try to do that, but a small grocery shop, or let's say a restaurant, they don't have the market power to demand that the credit card firms drop their interchange fees, and they have to comply.
Yeah. Okay, good. Very good. Nathalie?
Yeah, definitely. I think I really learned a lot from your guys sharing on this one. And I believe that I think now we all have a really deep understanding of what does CBDC means to the China's financial system, and also the influence of the current the digital revolution in China brings to the overall international financial system. So why not, currently we can move on to another sub-sexy sector in the digital currency, which is NFT, non-fungible token. So firstly, we may just invite Professor Pun to briefly share what is NFT and why is NFT currently just attracting so much attention in the capital market? And how is NFT related to the cryptocurrency system? Yeah.
Okay, so I think your video actually did a pretty good job in explaining some of the key aspects of NFT. It was interesting because 6 months ago, I was in the SFD community, and I was asking the question and say, how do you classify NFT? Is it as a security or is it as what? And then most of the people sitting in there, which are the senior regulators from various places and some commercial guy. A commercial guy probably already know, but the regulator sitting in there and say, what is NFT? Okay. So NFT actually has changed a lot in terms of the transaction in the last 6 to 9 months. And I think if you asked a question a year ago, frankly speaking, a lot of people doesn't even know what it is. Okay. So to put it precisely, there are 2 kinds of NFT. One is really the digital representation of ownership. Well, actually, both of the kind represent the ownership of certain things, and it's just that there are 2 kinds. One is digital form, one is the physical form. And the physical form of ownership, for example, if you were to own a Mona Lisa, you actually have to go to a lawyer to type in a contract and how you explicitly bind this wonderful NFT, which is an electronic thing, through this contract with actually the real physical object. Okay. And for the digital part, it's actually easier because essentially what is mentioned in the video is you actually get what is called a signature. Now, it used the word signature, but in cryptography, signature is a really highly abused word. It's really the hash, using a hash algorithm to generate a unique representation of that digital, and then set that you own that digital, which is nothing but saying that you own the hash value. Okay. And when you transfer it, you are actually transferring the ownership of that hash value from one to another one. Now, in the broad sense, that's kind of what it is. And the non-fungible part essentially is there is one and only one. Now, given that said, I think that if you look at the existing NFT market, it really divides into multiple aspects. So the first aspect is very similar to the video, what you talk about, where you sell art and all these ownership of objects. And then the second part that you probably have heard of recently, Facebook has renamed themselves to Meta, that the metaverse is also kind of a variant of this NFT, except that how Mark Zuckerberg is going to play with it is a different story. And then there is games that is based on NFT. And then there is also all these, I would say, existing intellectual properties such as NBA, where NBA Top Shot uses the moment concept, and there is this Disney studio, Marvel studio, a lot of the major league essentially sign up for that. Now, in my mind, I think a couple of days there were a regulator that actually comes and tell me and say, what's your view on NFT? And I think among DeFi and NFT is probably going to take off big time, okay? For the following reasons. First, there is a lot of companies such as the NBA, such as the studios, the movie studio or any type of studio. They have been looking for means to monetize what they have. And all these licensing concepts or how they protect intellectual property, over the years, there has been many versions of trying and it's failed. Now, this seems to be one of those that help them to make it more lively, that they can actually go trade and make money from it. And with that mindset, whether it is on the Ethereum blockchain or not on Ethereum blockchain, they will find ways to make this successful, okay, by riding on that platform. And from one of the studies that we have done, we already see people happening in there. For example, Axie Infinity is one of the very, very popular games going on originally in Ethereum network, okay, or the Ethereum platform. Because of its popularity, a lot of people who play it will have to pay what they call a gas fee to play on the Ethereum platform. And that gas fee has been getting to be too expensive for the volume of trade, for the volume of activity to be sustainable. And since then, they essentially move all the users and most of the activity off the Ethereum network to their own private blockchain. And what I'm seeing is that it's essentially a manifestation of a lot of companies who will eventually try to move on to that platform for several advantages. One is they don't have to pay a hefty fee for the activities to go on or for their transaction to go on. Second thing is actually they kind of remove themselves from this concept that they are being labeled as using digital currency to do things. As long as the currency is within the ecosystem, they have little worry about how that the regulators will come in and say, hey, you are playing around with Ethereum, you're playing around with some digital token, which should be regulated during trading. They're essentially trying to wash that away from that system. Okay, so that's the other part that has happening. And regarding the art trading thing, I think it's still going to go on. There are some activities. One group of my students is studying something called CryptoPunk, essentially trying to figure out why is one CryptoPunk worth so much more than the other one. And the first NFT was CryptoKitties, and one of the things that when my student work on it, because my student is younger age, they give me two different pictures of two different kitties, and one of them sell for $2 million and one of them sell for like $2. And at my age, I have no way I can differentiate why that one is worth $2 million and why this one is worth $2. But for them, it seems that they have been trading on these things and they kind of know what is going on. And so what we are trying to do is to apply economic methods to trying to understand, is there a real thing that we can capture to define the value of these things? So in a nutshell, NFT is not just one thing, it's actually a multiple thing. And metaverse is something I also mentioned. I think it will also manifest itself into a totally separate thing that is a spin-off of the NFT. Specifically, you have seen that ever since Mark Zuckerberg made that announcement and changed the company name, any stock that has something to do with metaverse suddenly kind of go up like crazy, okay? I will just start from there and see what Professor Duffy has to add.
Actually, I was going to ask you another question, Professor Puen.
Sure.
So NFT, if I were to NFT, let's say one of my research papers, or you were to NFT one of your research papers, would we be able to control information about, or at least to obtain data on who is viewing the research paper by observing the blockchain transactions that by which individuals around the world are accessing the NFT version of our research papers?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So right now, most of the NFT activity is used to track the transaction. Okay, that means buy and sell. Okay, and the ownership associated with it. And the way Ethereum works, unfortunately, is a pay system where you pay a fee to execute that transaction. Okay, from a smart contract standpoint, it is entirely possible to tie it in such that whoever wants to view this will have to go through the blockchain to do it. But if I were to pay a gas fee, and this gas fee associated with the Ethereum price, which right now is close to $4,000+, okay? And every time I try to access it or to track it, I have to pay a gas fee associated with it. I think the economics will just won't work out, okay? Unless there has to be someone that is subsidizing the system. Now, actually, interestingly, we have some hypothesis on some of the game, very popular game that is going on right now. We felt that there is a huge subsidies going on in order for people to play and generate that numerous amount of transactions. And we are in the process of studying whether there is evidence to prove that there are a third party which is subsidizing this. So to get back to your question is, if some organization and say, hey, for the sake of academic, we are willing to subsidize all these transaction fees for viewing, then it's entirely possible for you to create an access whereby for every view, everything is being tracked. But someone has to pay a fee to do that.
Mm-hmm. I see. And there's no way to avoid the Ethereum gas fee. One cannot set up a blockchain just for NFTs to be viewed.
You could, and very similar to what Axie Infinity has done, they set up a separate blockchain, which is essentially a fork of the Ethereum. And what they have done is essentially they dramatically push down the gas fee to be not associated with the real Ethereum gas price.
I see.
And with that, essentially, then they can carry out huge amount of transactions. Now, one of the things that we are trying to figure out just for that specific project is when you move off the Ethereum blockchain, the value that you derive from those transactions, is it still monetizable? Okay, because at the end of the day, a lot of people in it are really for gain, not just for fun. They are there to make money. So if you move it off and associate with the standard Ethereum blockchain, and there is no linkage with respect to the Ethereum price anymore, then the fact that when I want to take a profit, how does that actually manifest itself? Now, for the academic paper, you don't have to worry about that. You just care about that. You can see all these activities that is going on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's really helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I really learned a lot from your sharing on this one. And maybe a follow-up question on this one, like maybe from our two speakers' views, what are the regulation uncertainty behind the NFT currently? And what is that future like progress for it? Yeah.
I have some views on that. I could start, and I think it applies not just to NFTs, but to a wide range of, let's say, call them digital assets or cryptocurrencies, including cryptocurrencies. Currently, at least in the United States, there's no market authority, no regulator that governs the exchange of cryptocurrencies or other blockchain-based digital assets. It's just a gap in the regulatory system. And US regulators have said we need to close this gap. So currently, it's very difficult to regulate protection of investors, market stability, a violation of banking principles in the DeFi, or even actually on cryptocurrency exchanges. It's very difficult because of the lack of authority of the regulators. Some of the regulators are stepping in and saying, we will apply our limited authority anyway, but everybody is waiting for Congress to clarify what is the mandate for, let's call it the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or a new regulator that would set order and stability and investor protection into the DeFi space and into the crypto or digital asset space more generally. And I think that would be a good idea because investors can be hurt, they could lose money, they could be defrauded, and you might end up with a market that gets so big, it's currently 3 trillion of cryptocurrencies globally, that even if nobody was defrauded, there could be a collapse of a, let's call it a cryptocurrency that causes financial distress in the economy. So this needs to be properly regulated. I know that some of your listeners will find that very unpopular. When I spoke about this at the Senate, I got 700 tweets the next day. And they were very rude. I can tell you, Natalie, I could not repeat half of these tweets because your listeners would be too offended. And some of if I translate it into polite English, it would be, you don't understand, Professor Duffy. The whole point is to avoid regulation. That's why we're doing DeFi.
Yeah, that's a great point for this. So let's invite Professor Point to share his insights on this.
Okay, so first of all, I absolutely echo what Professor Duffy is saying, that I think there is a genuine concern now, especially for those who are trying to provide I would say, an objective view of what is going on in the system. Even when we try to publish paper now, when we talk to the research assistants, what they can write and what they cannot write, we are somewhat concerned, and I would say self-censored, to the extent of how we should make that comment. Okay, so that I think is going to be a big issue because the community is so emotional. The crypto community is so emotional that anything you said that is somewhat negative or at least smell negative, the backfire will be like humongous and amplified by the social media. And that is a genuine concern. And I think that there needs to be something to kind of balance that in order for this thing to work. So that's one aspect. The second aspect, I absolutely agree with Professor Duffy. I think one of the biggest problems with creating regulations is several factors. One is the existing regulator, actually, most of them do not understand how this works. If you look at what they talk about, how they kind of describe it, maybe there is a better proficiency over in the United States, but I would say outside of the United States, a lot of people actually do not understand how this works. Okay, they will put things in there that makes no sense to a lot of people who understand how the system works. And as a result, it is going to be really big challenge or a very steep learning curve for the regulator to come in to even put the finger on the whole thing. Okay, the second issue is highlighted by Professor Duffy too, and I will echo that. There are so many cross-regulator issues with respect to anything that is happening in the DeFi, in an NFT, in the cryptocurrency world. When you talk about lending and borrowing, that belongs in Hong Kong to a like loan regulators. When you talk about trading, now that becomes SFC. When you talk about deposit, then it goes to the banking authorities. And when you talk about using DeFi to sell insurance, that goes to the insurance authority. And all these authorities have been operating within their own silo without understanding or don't want to understand what is going on across. And for them to really trying to collaborate and say, put together a framework that work in the new, these new concepts, it's going to be really difficult. So just putting the people together to talk is going to be really difficult. Having the law or the regulation to change, to adapt to that, it's even more difficult. Because then when you bring in the lawyer will say, hey, first you have to bring me up to speed as to what is really going on. And then by the time you educate all of them, the DeFi world and NFT world move so fast that you just zoom way past them already, okay? And then I think the first part of the issue is that I have been looking at DeFi and NFT and cryptocurrency since 2017, right? There has been in the past people come and tell me and say, Jack, how do you shut down the Bitcoin? And at that point in time, I still could provide some advice as to how you actually shut it down and what to do. But with the DeFi and the NFT, it's extremely difficult. Okay. The concept, I mean, when you use the term decentralized exchange to the regulator, they immediately map it to the physical exchange where there are multiple of them. While the decentralized exchange in the real sense is nothing but a program that runs on the Ethereum network or other platforms. And there is really no guessing as to where exactly does it run, depends on where the validator, the validator is. So it just happened, it just worked, and you don't even need to go through a third party to enter into the system. So today, when you deal with Bitcoin, in order for you to translate things from fiat back to crypto, you at least have to go through an exchange. And what regulator has been doing is essentially is trying to kind of put a stop on all these exchanges and say, please do your KYC, please do your AML, please no travel on these wonderful tokens. And as a result, we kind of like put something that can close it together. But with DeFi, anyone can write a program and fire off a smart contract and execute a whole bunch of trades and come back without any authorities to even understand what they have done. Okay, so that fundamentally creates a huge challenge, even for the regulator, as to how do they even deal with that? And not to mention the jurisdiction aspect, right? Is it part of the US jurisdiction? Is it part of the Hong Kong jurisdiction? Is it part of the China? Is it part of the European? Is it part of Bahamas? No one even can answer that. And then I think everyone is trying to put out their spin and say, this is how I'm going to tax you. And last time when I looked at the tax code for all of them, they have a lot of like conflicts. Right. Some of them will deem at certain time as a capital gain. Some of them as deemed as when I transacted as a capital gain. I mean, it's just that no one is going to own even in terms of the tax of this system. Okay. So that's where I would stop at this point in time. It's just a very, very difficult problem to deal with today understanding, with today how the regulators are being structured. It almost requires a totally different organization to come in and trying to figure out how to manage this. And maybe it has to be a global effort where all these parties have to have some agreement, maybe similar to what Biden has put off as a worldwide corporate minimal tax to deal with that. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, I think that completes all our discussion on the DeFi and NFT. And I really appreciate your sharing on this topic, just deepen my understanding a lot. And now we just have a final question for Professor Duffy. So currently, I think most of the country's digital currencies are on the testing stage. So we would like to hear from you that in your point of view, what kinds of advantages that a country will have in the international financial system if it has its like a mature digital currency system?
Yeah, well, first, we touched on this topic earlier. So Professor Pun mentioned that Thailand, the United Arab Emirates, Hong Kong, and China have developed a prototype ability to exchange CBDCs across borders. And so this may be one of the advantages to having a CBDC is that you can participate in these cross-border CBDC bridges. They're called M-bridges. They've been set up under the sponsorship of the Bank for International Settlements, which is in Basel, Switzerland. And they have a hub in Hong Kong. They have one in Toronto, Canada. I'm a Canadian. They have one in several other places around the world. And so these CBDC exchange points or bridges, that will be an important objective for various countries. They also want to be able to sit at the table of regulators or ministries of finance globally when deals or agreements are negotiated, whether in Basel, Switzerland, or in Washington, or at the G7 or G20 meetings, or at the Committee for Payments and Market Infrastructure, which is also in Basel. If you don't have a digital technology for doing CBDCs, if you haven't developed it, it's difficult to sit at the end of the table and say, well, our country insists that everybody observe the following standards. How do you, first of all, have credibility if you haven't developed the technology, and how do you impose common standards when you don't even have the technology? And for this reason, one of the governors of the Federal Reserve, Lael Brainerd, said that she could not even wrap her head around the idea that the United States would not develop the technology. So I think you have to have the technology. Now, whether you use it or not in your own domestic payment system, I think that's yet to be decided. The costs and benefits are yet to be calculated. We don't know them until they're developed. So I'm not suggesting that developing the technology means that you should be using it. That remains to be seen.
Yeah. So I think thanks again for sharing on this one. And I think now the main part of our panel is completed. And sincerely, again, thanks for the Professor Pun and Professor Duffin's great insights shared with us. I think we all learned a lot in this great FinTech panel. And due to the time limit, and we really apologize that we may not provide it as a Q&A session. And but thanks again for our insights sharing during this whole session. And so please, I think on the screen, you can just see the QR code, and please scan this QR code, provided us your great feedbacks on this panel. And I think Michigan China Forum, we will also provide a lot of future panels regarding different like sexy industry and hot topics on it. And our MCF team sincerely value your feedback on each panel. And please like scan this QR code, provided with us your valuable feedback on this FinTech panel. And we'll just further improve based on your feedbacks. And it may take a few minutes to fill in all this the survey on the feedback on gathered on this FinTech panel.
So maybe while the students are filling out the survey, let me just express my thanks for organizing this, and it's an honor to actually talk together with Professor Duffy. I heard a lot of your talk, so that's wonderful to be together with you.
Well, let me say the same thing. I'm grateful to Natalie for inviting me, and now that I know you, Professor Pun, I hope I can call on you for advice again when I have a question about your research expertise that I need help with.
But certainly, let's do more communication on that.
Yeah, let's stay in touch. Okay. I know some of the experts in Hong Kong, and now I know one more.
Oh, that's really great. Great to see that you guys have connection further. Yeah.
Thank you for helping to put us together.
Yeah, this is also the honor from our MCF to invite you to speakers to share your insights on this FinTech panel. And also on the screen, and welcome you all to follow MCF on the Instagram, YouTube, and also WeChat. We will just provided a lot of update on the pandemic and also some recent news and also the review for our panel. So don't hesitate to follow MCF on Instagram, YouTube, and also WeChat.
Natalie, are you going to NFT our program tonight?
So I think NFT is really interesting. Yeah, I will consider this one. Yeah, so I think that's now like we're approaching to this ending for our FinTech panel. And sincerely, thanks for our great insights shared by our Professor Pun and Professor Duffin. And also thanks again for all the like members from the MCF to holding this our FinTech panel. And also thanks for everyone's attendance to our panel. So hope you all like enjoy this FinTech panel. And thank you for this attendance. And please like following us. And like I'll just look forward to our future events. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, Jen.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.